When we look back on the internet, it reflects culture in real life. The people, wars, events that shaped what the internet is today is very similar to real life. And just as in real life, there are people out there who love to revel in fear. Those who thrive on terror and Tumblr angst. Today, my friends, we are discussing a very important part of internet history. Let's discuss Creepypasta. Creepypasta has been a part of my life ever since I started using the internet. I have vivid memories of me sitting in kindergarten and this kid showing me a Matthew Santoro video of the top 10 most scary creepypastas ever made. Needless to say, I was scared shitless. And ever since then, I was obsessed with this weird side of the internet, a phase that lasted for like 9 years. But what are creepypastas?
Contrary to popular belief, the term creepypasta is not a word to describe an off-putting plate of Italian food. Creepypasta are horror stories that were copy and pasted all over the internet back in the day to scare the crap out of little kids like me. Hence the word creepypasta was born from the term copypasta.
Before, urban legends were spread by word of mouth, so the stories would change as time went on to fit the current social climate. But with the advent of the internet, that all changed. Creepypasta stories had very similar story structure and theme. They always consisted of a main paranormal character or event and the encounters of random people with them. Sometimes we have a backstory, sometimes we have nothing at all. These sort of stories always existed, of course. Creepypasta are just glorified campfire ghost stories after all. But thanks to the internet, these stories and characters blew up all over the world. And that, the internet, is what led to the rise and fall of the genre. The first mention of the term creepypasta could be traced all the way back to the early 2000s, where these stories were spread on message boards and chat rooms like 4chan.
Now, I wasn't really part of that, mostly because I was free.
But in 2010, when I was able to walk without face planting in the ground, the creepypasta subreddit was created. And 4 years after that, Creepypasta.com. This era is where creepypasta would explode into stupidly high popularity. Something about them just clicked with internet culture immensely, and I think it was in the way that these stories were presented. Creepypasta wouldn't be anywhere if it wasn't for the stories that made it happen. So let's go through all the most popular stories that excited me so much as a child, because I haven't read them in like 6 years, so this is gonna be fun.
After waking up with a jolt, the girl laid in bed a few seconds longer. Reaching over to switch on her bedside lamp, she tried to remember exactly what had stolen her sweet slumber away. When she couldn't, the brunette swung her legs over the side of the bed and heaved herself up. Checking the time on her phone, she snorted when she saw it was midnight, the witching hour. Knowing that sleep would only evade her, she left her bedroom for the kitchen, a good cup of coffee on her mind. As she passed by her front door, a chill spread like liquid fire down her spine. "It's only winter," she told herself, focusing again on the coffee plan. Measuring out scoops, water, and preparing her cup kept her occupied. But as the dark liquid boiled, she had nothing left to keep her mind from wandering off. The chill returned, and she couldn't help but glance behind her to the front door. It stood there innocently enough, just like always. The deadbolt was still in place, and she could see nothing amiss with it. Turning back to her coffee, she did her best to forget about the feeling. With her cup in hand, she started back towards her bedroom. As she walked by the front door, she decided that a quick glance out of the peephole would calm her restless mind. The chill worsened with each step she took towards the door, and further away from the safety and warmth of her blankets. She pressed her empty hand against the cold metal door and took a deep breath before leading her eye to the peephole. At first, she could only see an inky blackness that somehow seemed to swirl within itself. When she blinked in surprise, the void melted away. She wished it hadn't. In its place, there stood what she could only guess was once a man. The limbs were long and inhumanly awkward, with bulky joints branching off into several arms, not unlike the branches of a tree. The creature was draped in a black suit, somehow making the thing more nightmarish to her. The icing on the proverbial cake, however, was what passed as the hellish thing's face. It was as though her mind blurred the ghastly visage to spare itself further shock and horror. She shoved herself away from the door with the hand still pressed against it. The scalding mug of coffee fell, the liquid burning her bare legs as she fell backwards and tried to crawl away from the door. She knew, somehow, that her mind hadn't been playing tricks on her. As she crab-walked away from the door, she watched as tendrils as black as the void she first saw snake around through the cracks. The girl was trapped between the instinct to flee and the gut feeling to not turn her back on the door. When the door jolted, the urge to flee overcame her, and she slipped in the burning liquid as she tried to make it back to her room. She knew deep down that she was trapping herself in a corner, but she had to get away from the door. The girl was halfway down the hallway when she heard the previously locked door creak open. She screamed and slipped into a wall, cracking her chin on it and stunning her. After that, there was only blackness. A warm, male voice snapped the woman out of her trance. As she turned around, she was met by one of her sister's doctors. She nodded, not sure if she should say anything, or even if she could find her voice, if she did have anything to say. That morning, she had gotten an urgent phone call from the hospital, saying that her sister, Lindsay, was there. Before they had even let her see her, the doctors had pulled her off to the side and insisted that they talk to her about what might have happened. Phrases like self-inflicted and assault had been thrown around, and Nicole felt her mind reel. She still hadn't fully understood what they had been saying until she saw Lindsay with her own eyes. Her little sister had a bandage wrapped around her head, covering both of her ears as well as her eyes. They said it was to keep her now deadened eyes from drying out, and to try to keep infection out of the wounds Lindsay had made in her ears. The doctors had guessed that either she or someone else had jammed a pencil into them to keep her off balance or to defend herself against something. There was the mix of first and second degree burns on her hands, legs, and feet, from what was assumed to be the coffee her neighbors found slipped all over the entry to her apartment. As Nicole walked into her sister's hospital room for the first time, she thought she had spied the silhouette of a man in the window. That, she knew, was impossible. Her sister's room was on the 3rd story of the hospital.
Slenderman is the most well-known creepypasta, even though he didn't really have a story until later on. It's more the idea of Slenderman that is scary. An unnaturally tall humanoid with no face stalking the woods of the world searching for his next victim. Slenderman inspired many creatives, this story spawning books, movies, and games. The most popular of these games being Slender, the 8 Pages, a game credited with single-handedly jump-starting the career of a bunch of YouTubers. The game admittedly did not age very well, but it's still a very important milestone in internet history. But with the good comes the bad. Bad, as in the Slenderman movie. This movie is atrocious. It's not a bad movie. Bad movies are fun, like Sharknado or The Room.
Hi.
Can I help you?
Yeah, can I have a dozen red roses, please?
Oh, hi, Johnny. I didn't know it was you. Here you go.
That's me. How much is it?
It'll be $18.
Here you go. Keep the change. Hi, doggy.
You're my favorite customer.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye.
This movie is boring, and that's the worst thing a movie can be. When I watch a Slenderman movie, don't you think I want to see Slenderman? I couldn't care less about any character in this movie, and I wasn't scared at all, and I'm a massive pussy. But speaking of Slenderman, I think now would be a great time to look at the images that made it happen. The strength that Creepypasta had over normal urban legends was that they could add a face to the story. These pictures were often dark and grainy, low quality obscurities with the main focus only barely visible. Slender is a great example, but almost all big creepypastas had an image. Jeff the Killer, Smile Dog, Eyeless Jack, the Russian Sleep Experiment. These distorted files struck fear and unease into whoever saw them for the first time. But what happens when we go one step further? Well, that's exactly what the creator of Ben Drowned did.
In September of 2010, Jad Dusable was a college student who bought a suspicious Nintendo 64 cartridge labeled Majora indicating it to be a copy of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask from a disconcerting old man at a garage sale, with the save data of former owner Ben still on it. As he plays the game, little inconsistencies begin to pop up, turning to outright glitches, leading him to go to the online site 4chan to post about his playing of the game as it unfolds. Playing as Link, he attempts different ways to modify the game out of curiosity. It reaches the point where he tries the Day 4 glitch, a well-known glitch in the Majora's Mask community, where you skip the third day's ending with the ability to explore the in-game world as depicted in the credits section. Causing the Day 4 glitch breaks the normalcy of the game, and he soon finds himself alone in Clocktown, with all of the inhabitants gone and unable to advance the game by turning back time, while endlessly hearing the laugh of the happy mask salesman. In an attempt to achieve a game over and return to the main menu, he forces Link to drown in a pond. When he does, Link clutches his head, screaming as if in a mask animation, with the screen flashing to depict the happy mask salesman smiling and laughing. The game continues, and the ocarina melody Elegy of Emptiness plays in reverse. A statue of Link is summoned, with its face locked in an unblinking stare. The statue follows Jadusable's character, moving just outside of the camera's perspective throughout the town. He tries to escape it, but nothing works. In desperation, Jadusable turns the camera to face the statue directly. After a while, the screen flashes back to the happy mask salesman and Link, only the latter also turns this time. The salesman, the statue, and Link all become locked in place, staring through the screen directly at him. Over the course of several sessions over a series of days, he writes in painstaking detail about each bizarre scenario he finds himself in, including spontaneously bursting into flames or lying unconscious, or dead, as the Majora-possessed Skull Kid looks on in silence. In a desperate attempt to return the cartridge to the old man who sold it to him, he sees the house empty. The old man's neighbor informing him that he has moved away. Jadusable, after hearing from the neighbor as to what happened in the house that the old man had lived in, comes to the conclusion that the cartridge is possessed by a spirit of its previous owner, a 12-year-old boy named Ben, who had drowned almost 8 years prior. Subsequently, a figure calling themselves Ben seemingly begins contacting him in and beyond the game itself, including changing his computer screen wallpaper to depict the Elegy of Emptiness and speaking through the online artificial intelligence Cleverbot. Eventually, Ben is revealed to have been hijacking his computer and providing a false account of the story's narrative and resolution of 4chan and YouTube, using it to escape the cartridge onto the internet, declaring, "Now, I am everywhere." A secret note from Jadusable, after an apparent epilogue from his former roommate Tyler, who accompanied him to the old man's former house after the first time he played the game, offers the true telling of events and references videos that were never published, seemingly because Ben had deleted them. After publishing his final account of the past week's events, called thetruth.rtf, Jadusable was never seen again.
This is only the beginning of the Ben Brown story. I haven't even gotten to the Moon Children or the Awakening, because if I did, the video would be an extra 45 minutes longer. And this is already my longest video ever made, so yay!
Ben Brown is very interesting because it has real world footage to back it up. The creator went and modded his copy of Majora's Mask so that the events in the game would play out as in the story. And that shit's creepy. I fully believed in Ben Brown for the longest time. And it just shows you that a little bit of effort can go a long way in terrifying kids for years. Now we go visit a good friend of mine who has helped me turn my friends into insomniacs for about 8 years. Say hello to my friend, the...
3 years ago, I had just returned from a trip from Niagara Falls with my family for the 4th of July. We were all very exhausted after a long day of driving. So, my wife and I put the kids right to bed and called it a night. At about 4 a.m., I woke up thinking my wife had gotten up to use the restroom. I used the moment to steal back the sheets, only to wake her in the process. I swiftly apologized and told her that I simply thought she got out of bed. When she turned to face me, she gasped and pulled her feet up from the end of the bed so quickly that her knee almost knocked me out of the bed. She then grabbed me and said nothing. After adjusting to the dark for half a second, I was able to see what caused the strange reaction. At the foot of the bed, sitting and facing away from us, there was what appeared to be a naked man or large hairless dog of some sort. Its body position was disturbing and unnatural, as if it had been hit by a car or something, and for some reason I was not instantly frightened by it, but more concerned as to its condition. At this point, I was somewhat under the assumption that we were supposed to help him. My wife was peering over her arm and knee, tucked into the fetal position, occasionally glancing at me before turning to the creature. In a flurry of motion, the creature scrambled around the side of the bed and then crawled quickly in a flailing sort of motion right along the bed until it was less than a foot from my wife's face. The creature was completely silent for about 30 seconds, or probably closer to 5. It just seemed like a while. Just looking at my wife, the creature then placed its hand on her knee and then ran into the hallway leading into the kids' rooms. I screamed and ran for the light switch, planning to stop him before he hurt my children. When I got to the hallway, the light from the bedroom was enough to see it crouched and hunched over about 20 feet away. He turned around and looked directly at me, covered in blood. I flipped the switch on the wall and saw my daughter, Claire. The creature ran down the stairs while my wife and I rushed to help our daughter. She was very badly injured and spoke only once more in her short life. She said these words, "He is the rake." My wife drove her car into a lake that night while rushing our daughter to the hospital. She didn't survive. Being a small town, news got around pretty quickly. The police were helpful at first, and the local newspaper took a lot of interest as well. However, the story was never published, and local television news never followed up either. For several months, my son Justin and I stayed in a hotel near my parents' house after we decided to return home. I began looking for answers myself. I eventually located a man in the next town over who had a very similar story. We got in contact and began talking about our experiences. He knew of 2 other people in New York who had seen the creature we now referred to as the rake. It took the 4 of us about 2 solid years of hunting on the internet and writing letters to come up with a small collection of what we believed to be accounts of the rake. None of them gave any details, history, or follow-up. One journal had an entry involving the creature on it just in its first 3 pages and never mentioned it again. A ship's log explained nothing of the encounter, saying only that they were told to leave by the rake. That was the last entry in the log. There were, however, many instances where the creature's visit was one of a series of visits with the same person. Multiple people who also mentioned being spoken to, my daughter included. This led us to wonder if the rake had visited any of us before our last encounter. I set up a digital recorder near my bed and left it running all night. Every night for 2 weeks, I would tediously scan through the sounds of me rolling around in my bed each day when I woke up. By the end of the 2nd week, I was quite used to the occasional sound of sleep while blaring through the recording at 8 times the normal speed. This still took almost an hour every day. On the first day of the 3rd week, I thought I heard something different. What I found was a shrill voice. It was the rake. I can't listen to it long enough to even begin to transcribe it. I haven't let anyone listen to it yet. All I know is that I've heard it before, and I now believe that it spoke when it was sitting in front of my wife. I don't remember hearing anything at the time, but for some reason the voice on the recorder immediately brings me back to that moment. The thoughts that must have gone through my daughter's head make me very upset. I have not seen the rake since he ruined my life, but I know that he has been in my room while I slept. I know and fear that one night I'll wake up to see him staring at me.
The rake is great, man. Such a mysterious character we literally know nothing about. The rake uses the greatest fear of all, the fear of the unknown, to its greatest potential. What is it? Where did it come from? How do it do what it be? We know nothing, and we don't need to know anything. All that you have to know is that you have to get the fuck away. And lastly, we have a story not as well known as the rest because it disappeared under mysterious circumstances.
Hello, my name is Mitch, and I'm here to tell you guys about an experience I had.
I don't know if it was paranormal or whatever stupid word people use to describe this supernatural phenomena, but after that thing visited me, I believe in that paranormal trash now. A week after I moved in with my brother, Edwin, after my house was foreclosed, I finally finished unpacking. Edwin liked the idea of me moving in, since we hadn't seen each other in 10 years. So I was excited too. I soon fell asleep after I moved in. After 1 week, I heard rustling noises coming from outside at about 1 in the morning. I thought it was a raccoon, so I ignored it and tried to sleep. The next morning, I told Edwin about it, and he agreed. The next night, however, I thought I heard my window opening and a loud thump, as if something entered my room. I darted up and looked around my room, but I saw nothing. The next morning, Edwin dropped his coffee cup when he saw me. He held up a nearby mirror, and I saw myself. I had a large gash on my left cheek. After I was rushed to the hospital, my doctor told me that I must have been sleepwalking. But then he showed me something that made my blood turn cold. He lifted up my shirt to reveal a sewn-up incision where my kidneys were. I stared him in the eyes, my eyes widening. "You somehow lost your left kidney last night. We don't know how, though." "I'm sorry, Mitch," my doctor told me. The next night was my breaking point. Around midnight, I woke up to see a truly horrifying sight. I was staring face to face with a creature with a black hoodie and a dark blue mask with no nose or mouth staring down at me. The thing that scared me the most was that it had no eyes, just empty black sockets. The creature also had some black substance dripping from its sockets. I grabbed the camera on a nearby mantel and took a picture. After the picture, the creature lunged at me and tried to claw open my chest to get at my lungs. I stopped it by kicking it in the face. As I ran out of the room, I grabbed my wallet. I would need the money. I ran out of my brother's house into the night. I eventually ended up in the woods near Edwin's house, and I tripped on a rock. I fell unconscious, and I woke up in the hospital again. My doctor entered the room, the same one who treated me before. "I have good news, and I have bad news," my doctor started. "The good news is that you had minor injuries, and your parents are going to pick you up." I sighed with relief. "The bad news is that your brother has been killed by something. I'm sorry." My parents took me back to Edwin's house to collect my remaining belongings, which I did. Upon entering my room, I was scared, but I remained calm. I grabbed my camera, then stopped dead in my tracks. In the hallway leading to my room, I saw Edwin's body, and something small lying next to it. I picked up the small thing and entered my parents' car, not mentioning Edwin's corpse. I looked at the thing I'd picked up and nearly vomited. I was holding it, my stolen half-kidney with some black substance on it.
The immense popularity of these stories generated a bunch more in the same genre. Great stuff like Small Dog and the Russian Sleep Experiment. From Been Drowned spawned the .exe series like Sonic.exe. Channels dedicated to reading creepypasta popped up all over the place and started to thrive. Comics, animation, merchandise, the creepypasta community was thriving and starting to shape a generation. But that's also the sad part. We know the internet. When something becomes immensely popular, there's always going to be a loud minority to ruin it for everyone. We see it time and time again on this wonderful internet of ours. It happened to My Little Pony, FNAF, Undertale, Cuphead and even Minecraft for a while. All of these fanbases were infected by a virus called OEC, overexposure and cringe. It's basically a rule on the internet that when something becomes very popular, it becomes cringe to the people outside of the community. It's a phenomenon I like to call Newton's cringe law. If something becomes popular, it must become cringe. The more you're exposed to these stories, the less scary they become, and the less you end up caring. The fear of the unknown is the greatest fear of all. But when you know everything about the unknown, what's the point? And that's a shame. The reason that things become so popular is because they are really good and appeal to a wide variety of people. This era is also where a strange subgenre of creepypasta emerged from the depths of hell. Shittypasta. I believe Shittypasta started with arguably the most popular character in all of creepypasta, Jeff the Killer. The Jeff the Killer story, in my opinion, started out pretty good.
You wake at 3 AM, disturbed by some subtle shifting sound within your room, just on the edge of hearing. Propping up on one arm, you survey the room looking for some source of the noise, hoping beyond hope that you won't find one. At first, your hopes are raised. Everything seems to be silent. Everything seems to be still. But it isn't. From beyond the long concealing drape of the curtain, a voice with flickering serpentine hiss whispers, "Go to sleep."
But later, someone wrote a full backstory and, well, holy shittypasta.
The story starts with Jeff, his mom and dad, and little brother Louie moving to a new house. Jeff was pretty happy about this, seeing as his house is much, much fancier than their old one. The family later gets invited to one of the neighbor's kids' birthday party, which 13-year-old Jeff despises because he's a big boy. After a quarrel with his mom, he went to bed and had a weird tugging feeling, but he ignores it. The next day at breakfast, he feels the same feeling. Later that day, while waiting for the bus, Jeff and his brother get threatened by a stereotypical cool kid, fat kid, and a thin kid. They pull out a knife to convince Jeff and Louie to hand over some money, but Jeff was having none of it. He goes up to Randy and hits him in the nose, preceded by breaking his wrist he held the knife in and grabs it. When the other two rushed him, Jeff stabbed Keith in the arm and punched the wind out of Troy. Louie was shocked, but couldn't say anything because they had to run away from the school bus that was coming their way. Jeff reflected on that fight later. He seemed to enjoy causing pain. The next day, the police arrived at their door, wanting to arrest Jeff, but Louie took the blame, showing a makeshift scar on his arm. He was taken into custody. This took a number on Jeff, seeing as his brother took the blame for a crime he committed. His parents, on the other hand, didn't seem to care at all, and wakes Jeff up to go to that party mentioned earlier. This, of course, upsets Jeff, but he begrudgingly goes. When Jeff arrived at the party, he ended up playing cops and robbers with the kids and kinda enjoying himself. That is, of course, until Randy and his goons leap over the fence to confront Jeff. As Randy attacks Jeff, Troy and Keith pull out real firearms. They have a brutal brawl that takes them to the kitchen where Randy smashes a bottle of vodka over Jeff's head. At that moment, Jeff gets the weird feeling again, but it's much worse this time, and he snaps. Jeff gets up and throws Randy to the ground, punching so hard in his chest that his heart stops beating. Troy and Keith run in, unloading both their clips at the fleeing Jeff, missing every shot. Jeff runs into the bathroom, with the boys following close behind. He knocks out Troy with a towel rack he pulled out of the wall, but Keith grabs Jeff by the collar and pulls him down, pouring bleach all over Jeff's face. Jeff slams the towel rack into Keith's face, and he lay there bleeding out, but not before throwing a lighter on Jeff, setting him ablaze. Jeff wakes up with his face wrapped in bandages and stitches all over his body. He was in a hospital, where he stayed for a couple of weeks while he was healing. The day finally comes, where Jeff can take off his bandages, and he discovers that his face was horrifying. His lips burnt to a deep red, his face bleached to pure white, and his hair singed black. Jeff loved it. Later that night, Jeff's mother was awoken by the sound of crying coming from their bathroom. She walks in to find Jeff standing there with a knife. He turns around, with a permanent smile carved into his face, and black-rimmed eyes where he cut off his eyelids. He wanted to never stop smiling, and to be able to always stare at his beautiful new face. His mother rushes to their bedroom and wakes his father to get the gun, but it was too late. Jeff gutted them both. He finished the job by finally taking out his brother Louis while chanting,
Go to sleep.
The Jeff the Killer story is written like an angry 15-year-old just watched The Dark Knight Rising and was like, yeah, that's me. Just by the synopsis we gave you, you could see that this is just a power trip story. But for some reason, it clicked. Part of why I believe that Jeff the Killer grew so exponentially was because of the relatability of Jeff. And that's kinda sad to say, honestly. And so all of these angsty teens started making their own versions of this Jeff the Killer archetype. Jane the Killer, Tiki Toby, Laughing Jack, the Puppet Maker, or whatever the fuck that other one's called, holy shit. And this is not the only time this has happened before. As I mentioned, the Ben Drowned Creepypasta spawned the .exe genre, which is also pretty cringe, and will take about 20 more minutes to cover all of that, so I'm just gonna leave that to the side for now. You can jump into that if you want, I don't know. All of these stories follow a format of angsty teen murders everybody, cursed video game murders everybody, my OC is Slenderman's proxy and I want him to fuck me so bad with his tentacle. When a community reaches cringe status, people outside of the community usually ostracize and avoid it at all costs. And I guess that's just the cycle of the internet. You don't really hear about Undertale or Cuphead anymore, and that's because the communities behind these games burned too bright too fast and got unceremoniously snuffed out. Creepypasta was now seen in a bad light all over the internet. I haven't thought about Creepypasta in a very long time, and up until making this video. And looking back, it filled me with a kind of nostalgic joy. The community is chugging along pretty decently right now, but it's not nearly as big as it was in its prime. And I guess that's really for the best. So now, after a long night, I have but one request. Don't be afraid to do the things you love. If you like My Little Pony, go for it, man. If Fortnite is your favorite video game ever, more power to you. Don't be afraid to be yourself. And if this video interests you at all, then I strongly encourage you to go out and read some creepypasta. It's great fun and an amazing rabbit hole to get into if you love horror like me. Horror. Hey, great job! You made it to the end of the video. I'm so proud. Have a cookie. Anyways, I want to thank everybody who helped me on this video. It really could not have been done without them. These people are amazing and I strongly advise you to go look up their work. Their info is in the description, so go ahead and take a look, and once again thank you so much for watching this video. Now go do something better with your life.